Okay, hi guys, welcome back to the DFM podcast. And on this episode, I have Ashton Gleckman with me. He's a composer and actually now film director as well. So this is actually a bit interesting. This might be the only guest that might actually be younger than me for this podcast that's got to be coming on. So Ashton, if you'd like to introduce yourself, you can be as brief or as long as you want. Just how you got started in music and what you're up to now and so on.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Ashton Gleckman. I'm 19 years old. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, USA. I started playing music when I was like 7, and I played in some rock bands leading up to when I was 14. And at that point, I saw the film The Imitation Game and immediately started studying film scoring. And I started taking lessons from a professor at Butler University, which is a college nearby where I live. And at that point, I sort of began to study orchestral music, classical music, and went into film scoring. When I was 15, my first year of high school, I scored my first feature film, and I've just sort of been doing it ever since. I love making YouTube videos. I have this series called Behind the Score, and recently last year, I made my first documentary film, and I'm currently in production right now for my second feature film. So that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, so one thing that one kind of asks straight away is actually, since you mentioned your YouTube channel, Ashton would be another composer, just like JJ Bertium, who was on before, who'd have a pretty big following on YouTube as a music composer goes. And you mentioned sort of the behind the score, and that's what I kind of want to ask you is like that virtual mock-up idea. You clearly enjoyed them, and I've watched all of them, and you've done many of them at this point. But how sort of useful have you found them over time actually doing, and what are the main like benefits that you actually get out of doing them?
Right. Interesting thing about JJ Berthium is he was one of my early instructors in music, actually. So he taught me a lot about writing music for orchestra, and he's just a really talented composer and a really, really awesome guy. So
Yeah.
I definitely, if anyone hasn't checked out his channel, it's a treasure trove of great
Oh yeah.
information. But in terms of the behind the score, I remember starting out, and I don't know if you agree, but like when you start out, you're always looking for new resources to learn from, and especially on YouTube because things are free. And so I was looking for stuff like that, learning how to create mockups, and I couldn't really find anything other than a couple composers were doing something like that, but they weren't really using the music that I grew up knowing and loving. And I feel like one of the best ways to learn is by studying music that you're familiar with and that you know, because then you can learn how to create sort of realistic sounding mock-ups and learn how the music sort of builds. So I was like, you know what, this might be a fun kind of thing to do. And the first one I did was all the way back in, I think it was October of 2016. I did Harry Gregson Williams's Narnia soundtrack. And keep in mind, this was a long time ago, so it wasn't really, I'm not too proud of it, but Harry ended up hearing it, and I went out to go meet him, actually. And so that was like a really great start to the Behind the Score series, getting the chance to meet the composer that I did the mock-up for. And he was just such a cool guy, totally awesome, and gave me a huge inspiration boost, because I feel like there's certain times in everyone's lives where like you just get that inspiration boost, and meeting Harry was one of them. And I went on to start making more. And at this point, I think I've made like 26 or 27 hours of Behind the Score videos between 4 seasons. And I've focused mainly on Zimmer scores simply because he's sort of the guy that I sort of look up to, because he has a really great knack for tech as well as me.
Yeah.
So he's an incredible mock-up guy. He's an incredible composer, but he just really has this awesome knack for creating soundscapes and sound worlds. And for me, when I'm using a computer, I really like to go back to his music because it teaches me a lot about that. So I've done a lot of Zimmer scores, and that's sort of how it got started. And I figure it's just a good way to sort of, if there's one kid out there who's 15 years old like me, who's trying to learn how to do this thing, and if he can see one of my videos, then I guess that's mission accomplished.
And then from them, do you feel that that sort of, I say that would have helped with a few things. I say this, like the first two things I come to mind be one, sort of orchestration, and then two, MIDI programming as well as a composer. Would that have like really excelled sort of your learning abilities in those sort of two departments of music? You understand? Like,
Yeah, I had an early experience where I was talking with someone who was working in the industry and was pretty prominent. And I sort of asked him, do you have any tips for me? And he's like, just make sure that your mock-up skills are up to par, at least. Because he was telling me about his experiences, even when there were composers that were sort of better than him, he ended up getting the gig because he knew how to make better mock-ups, which is, it seems sort of counterintuitive. But I feel like mock-ups nowadays are so important because you're going to have directors that are sort of coming up to you and they want to hear full-scale versions of the pieces before the studio is going to start spending dozens of thousands of dollars on recording sessions and bringing in orchestras and musicians. So, I mean, you really have to not only be a composer, but you have to be a producer as well, and you have to be a head of department, which is a whole other aspect you start to get into with modern film scoring with guys like Zimmer, but really in general. So it's sort of a complex world in a way. But the thing that I love about MIDI and just orchestral samples and stuff like that is it's just sort of like a never-ending pool of fun.
Yeah.
It's just creative. It's almost like playing Minecraft, honestly. Like I used to play Minecraft when I was young, and this is just the latest reincarnation of that. You know, like you're going in, you're building literal blocks. I mean, you're going through, and it's a lot of fun, and you can pretty much do whatever.
Yeah, like I've actually had that recent experience with a friend. He's kind of a DJ to an extent, but he wants to start making his own music, and but he has no experience with the AW thing. Because I was like, okay, download Logic, and I'll help you get started. Well, I said once you get going, if you take it serious, it's got to sort of take over a lot. And so I got him going on Logic, and I showed him just how to use loops and just find a few sounds, and I left him be, and I came back to him like nearly a day later, and I said, "Oh, how'd you get on?" He goes, "Yeah, I spent probably around 4 hours just playing with different sounds, not actually writing anything."
No,
Like,
it is. I mean, it's sort of crazy. Like, I think they call it like sound hunting, where you're like starting a piece and you're just like going through all the samples, and even just the stock samples in Logic, you know, they aren't really that bad. I mean, like if you start out with them, like there's a lot worse samples you can find out there.
oh yeah.
So it's cool that they make that all available straight from the onset.
Especially the synth ones. I find the synth ones like really, like I've used the synth ones as my tracks, and like people now like would think that's just a stock like when I have Logic straight away.
Yeah, I don't use Logic anymore as my DAW, but sometimes I'll literally use patches from the synths in Logic, and I'll just sort of export them as waves and like use them because they're actually really good.
Yeah, like, well, I'll be like you. I've moved to Cubase as well now. I was on Logic at first because I was on Mac, but then I built up my own PC. So it's like, okay, I'll move to Cubase. But at the minute, that's why there's, if you see the background, like butterflies in the background, that's because I'm in my parents' house at the minute due to lockdown. And I have a Mac here, so I'm back on Logic for now, which actually I don't mind because I actually haven't used it in a while. So it's nice to sort of get actually back using it because I find it very useful to actually use two DAWs to sort of collaborate with. And anyways, I do kind of agree with that.
Oh no, for sure. Like I totally do. And I see pros and cons with every single DAW. I don't think anyone is like a perfect kind of thing. I think that the reason I really like Cubase is because the team over the past decade or so has been really dedicated to like listening to the people that are using it, and they're constantly sort of improving it based on that. But with that being said, I'm sort of a noob, and I'm still on Cubase version 9, like literally. I sort of feel like Ramin Djawadi, who's still on Logic 9.
Yeah.
But honestly, it just works. It works fine for me, and I haven't had the need to upgrade, and I still am able to do what I do in Cubase 9. And I just really like the Steinberg guys. They're super cool if you've met them. And yeah, their software just works really, really nicely.
One thing actually I would like to sort of ask you there, we're talking about sort of samples within stock plugins, but even, well, I'd consider both of us quite young. I'm not even 23 yet, but like even from when we've sort of started writing music, and from when I've sort of even known you through Facebook and online, samples have changed so much even in that short amount of time. Like the amount of free sort of samples that have came out, like I'm going to be uploading a video soon of the BBC Discovery from Spitfire. Like even that library, have you actually got a chance to try that library yet and like see how good it actually sounds for a free library?
So one thing, like I would tell everyone, if you're watching this and you haven't heard of something called Piano Book, I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Right. So Piano Book is like the biggest, awesome treasure trove, like pretty much on the internet for composers nowadays. It's literally this collection. I think they just hit 300 sample libraries that are completely free to download. So it does take a while to actually go in and download them and organize them and find out which one works for which version of Contact. But at the same time, they're just like, they're actually really impressive. And some of the sounds are, you know, better than others. But like in general, you'll find pianos that are just from all around the world. You'll find random instruments or sounds that you can sort of blend in. And obviously the Spitfire Labs is another one that's pretty prominent as well. And I mean, it's good stuff. It's not like, you know, when you get a lot of free stuff, sometimes it isn't, you know, and it makes sense. It's free. I mean, you can't really set any quality standards because it's free. But at the same time, Spitfire has done a really good job at releasing great free sample libraries for people that are both starting out, but also people that are working professionally can use this stuff.
Oh yeah, like it's kind of crazy how good some of them got. Like another even free library that I tend to just throw into a few tracks is Project Sam's Free Orchestra, which is like,
Right.
it's like if you're like a composer starting now, you could literally get the Spitfire BBC Discovery, Spitfire Labs, which are, well, Labs is a bit how to mix of things, but Discovery is just really orchestral based, and then literally get Project Sam Free Orchestra, which has drones and a few synths and all sort of different hits and impacts, all for free, and you can literally write near professional standard tracks straight out of a free library. Like, it's kind of
Exactly.
crazy how much
Yeah,
it's kind of
it is
changed.
amazing. Yeah. And it's inspiring to like to be in a world where that is possible now, because like even if you look back at the 90s, like when Hans was starting out and you actually had to have physical samplers, and you know, there's this great story of when Harry Gregson Williams was brought from England to Los Angeles, and Harry was sort of this kid, you know, who had been teaching, working for Richard Harvey, and he hadn't really been in like the tech world in
Mm-hmm.
terms of music. And Hans brings him to the bank and fills out a loan paper because he's going to buy Harry all of these physical hardware samplers. And these samplers are literally only capable of running like megabytes of samples. And now on one machine, we're able to run 16, 32, 64, 128 gigabytes of RAM. Like, it's sort of amazing. And it's sort of daunting as well. I still get daunted by technology. I get scared every time I open up the DAW, you know,
Yeah.
both because of the blank sheet, but also just because, and you know, HZ said this as well, it sort of makes it more difficult because it opens up endless possibilities, you know?
Yeah, you kind of sometimes nearly don't know where to start. There's actually just so many possibilities at this point.
Yeah, that's why I still like go on YouTube every now and then and just like watch random tutorials, because
Oh
like
yeah, I still do.
no matter how much I continue along my journey, I still find myself needing to learn stuff.
Oh yeah.
And there's just so much inspiring stuff, I think, on YouTube as well. It's a great place to learn.
Yeah, I think people kind of sometimes don't actually use it enough. Like, people are always saying, "Oh," like I always see on Facebook groups as well, and music composers like, "Oh, what courses would you recommend out there?" What I was like, just go to YouTube. Like, you honestly, sometimes you don't, like, there is obviously there's amazing courses out there, but sometimes you really don't have to pay for a course. You could I could name off nearly 5 to 6 composers. You being one of them off the top of my head, like, where there's loads of tutorials to learn from straight away without going to any paid courses. Like,
Yeah, and even like just the Junkie XL one, I think is like, you know, it's amazing. And the fact that somebody of that like stature would take the time to make free videos is sort of insane, like
yeah.
sort of crazy. Yeah.
Now, one thing I kind of wanted to ask you, which this happened a while ago, which if you can't talk about it, that's fine. But I'm sure
Oh, I think I know where we're going.
yeah, I'm sure you can say a little bit about it anyways, which is to do with bleeding fingers.
Oh, okay.
No, you
I
talk about
thought
it going
I
somewhere
thought
else.
you were going to the Hans Zimmer strings.
No, well, you can
Okay,
mention something about that if you want. I wanted to talk about your experience with bleeding fingers first,
great.
because for a lot of composers that would be seen as an amazing opportunity to write for
Yeah.
a custom library like that. And if anyone listening doesn't know what bleeding fingers is, it's basically sort of a custom production library, heavily with Hans Zimmer's base. It's his sort of custom production library, and Ashton was signed to them at one point and then stepped away for whatever reasons. As I said, you can mention them here if you want to. If not, that's fine. But I just want to sort of ask about how that came about and then your experiences with it and what it was like.
Yeah. It's sort of my first time talking about this, actually. Yeah. So first and foremost, before I even start, like the people at Bleeding Fingers, whether it's the people that are at the top or the composers that are working there, like Andre, Denise, like all of them are just like literally the coolest people like in the world. And like even when I went there, like I felt the minute I walked in like I was at home. And everyone was just so warm and sort of welcoming and just super super cool, and they're also just wickedly talented. Like the amount of music you're writing there is really really massive. So you're writing, you know, whole entire TV episodes in a week. You're recording them, stemming them, writing them all within a week long period. So these guys are literally compositional warriors. It's sort of
Yeah.
really inspiring. um, when I went to go meet with Hans back in 2018, the idea came up about Bleeding Fingers, and I started to write for them remotely from Indianapolis for, I think it was around 4 or 5 months, and then I went out there to work for them for a few weeks. All I'll say is the lifestyle of living out there in LA. I think I was still 18 at the time. It just was not for me at the time. Nothing against them. it just like being away from home for that long, and the working hours are also pretty intense. It just wasn't really for me. And so I learned so much from the experience, and I spoke with Hans afterwards, and I just said, thank you so much. And no bridges are burned. Me and him still are sort of
He now hates you. He's never going to speak to you ever
right.
again.
Yeah, exactly. But no, like things are still, and I still talk to the Bleeding Fingers guys all the time, and I give them my appreciation for how supportive they were when I was there. And when I had my film premiere in Los Angeles back in December, I met up with a lot of them, and it's just great keeping in touch with them. But they really are just the coolest people. So it's nothing that they did. It was just like sometimes things just don't really link up. And I don't know if anything is really at fault for that. I don't think there is at all. And I was really transparent with Hans about it and told him about how I experienced it. And he just could not have been cooler and could not have been more understanding. And I think that just goes to show that the sort of class act that both he is, but also they are as people. So it was a chapter of my life, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, and was it at that point where, because you were writing for them for so long, that there was no sort of remote option to go back to? It was really, we would rather you based here at this point because you have been writing for us for a bit, kind of.
Well, something happened when I was there, and something happened where it clicked. This filmmaker part of me, for some reason, I've always loved films, first of all, and I've sort of directed short films over the past 3 or 4 years. But when I was there, I was like, my gosh, wouldn't I love to be out on the field again with all my friends, making movies, interviewing people? Because when you're writing music, you're in a room. You're in a room, and sometimes it's a really dark room, and for a long period of time. And I have this thing where I love to get out, and I love to see people. Yeah. And for me, film was the best avenue for that. So I literally came home right after the Bleeding Fingers thing. And 1 week later, I was in pre-production for this movie, We Shall Not Die Now. And for the next 9 months of my life, I was making that film. I set off for Poland. I interviewed 25 Holocaust survivors and liberators. I had the chance to work with Michael Frankenberger from Austria to write the score, and Benjamin Wallfisch. So it was something opened up in me there in LA for Bleeding Fingers that I translated into this. And I've sort of become addicted to it. And that's why I'm doing another film right now. So
yeah, well, now that you've mentioned, I was going to leave it till a bit sort of later on to have a chat with you about, but we might as well talk about it now. So as I said at the start, Ashton obviously still writes music, but he's transitioned into actually making films at this point. So first, I'd like to say, are you just going to write the music for all the films you make, or are you actually going to take on composers?
I totally think at some point I'm going to take on composers, like for sure. I just think that like right now it's just sort of fun working with a couple of friends of mine and just sort of putting the music together. But I totally see myself at some point working with other composers, because I think that it's really nice. Music is sort of the last stage of the whole entire thing. And you really come to know that once you've made a film, and it's like, holy crap, like there's so much that happens before the music. When you finally get to the music, it's really nice to have one last minute writer to put their stamp on a film. So I definitely see myself working with, and that's why I like, for example, on my last film, I brought in Ben Wallfisch to write the main theme, because we sort of took what he did and we sort of put that into the score, and he sort of gave his own voice. And on this film, we're working with various different musicians to bring their own voice into the score as well. So I think it's always really nice to bring a lot of people in and have it be sort of a fun concoction of different voices.
You did a great job in getting someone of Benjamin's sort of stature for your first film as well. Like, if anyone listening maybe does know Benjamin Wallfisch, his most recent film? Would it be his most recent big one?
So yeah, he did It Chapter 2, and then Shazam, which was the one for Warner Brothers, and then Cure for Wellness and Lights Out. Those are the ones that.
So he's up there as a composer, because he's worked on a lot of big projects, and Ashton was able to grab him to write the main theme for his film, which is great. But even Michael is a great composer as well. Did you fully co-compose the score with him? Like, did he have a big hand in the score?
100%. So yeah, me and Michael literally split the cues down the middle. So we went through, spotted the film virtually, and then we had the cue sheet, and we literally just said, okay, you're doing 1M1 through 1M15. I'm doing 1M blah, blah, blah. And so it was really mutual collaboration. And then afterwards, we both went into each other's cues and started to sort of mess with things. And so definitely, and we're doing that again on this project that we're doing now. But then we're going to bring in somebody else to do the main theme again. because I think it's just really nice to have
Yeah.
somebody create a sort of sound world, and then for us to sort of help to develop that. And then we're also going to bring in various musicians as well, because the film I'm doing now is all about these communities in the middle of the American Appalachian Mountains. So they have a lot of influence from Scots-Irish music going back, and bluegrass, and there's banjos and mandolins, and there's so much influence there. So we're bringing all of that into the score, which should be sort of fun to do.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I hope you have a few live players for that one, yeah, because
We definitely will.
Yeah, because some of those instruments with us, it's hard to get samples to sound as good on some of those instruments that you'd like.
Especially the fiddle. Like if there's one thing with samples that I don't know if we'll ever get there, it's solo strings. It just for some reason, and I don't know if you agree, but like I feel like it's just like impossible to get solo strings right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it must be just the way some legatos are programmed can just be really, really hard to just fine detail, like everything you need to get. Like, don't get me wrong, I've heard a few people, like if who would come to mind? I'm trying to, there's one or two composers who just listen to some of their tracks online when they post them, like sort of group sharing page, and you're like, Jesus, you did really good at literally almost nailing that to a live player. Like one composer that always comes to mind, I'm not sure if you know, his name is Paul Cassidy. He does
oh yeah, of course, he's the coolest. Yeah, he's got great music.
He does those Williams sort of styles orchestration, but like, and in fairness, like he doesn't actually write a lot of films. I know he's working on something at the minute, but his orchestrations for virtual like orchestrations absolutely outrageous, the detail, and like how do you do this? Like, but there is the odd person, and there is a few instruments like that. Like I play saxophone, and saxophone's kind of one instrument that I always have struggled to find a really good solo one. There's a few that are cropping up more now, in fairness. And there is some good ones for ensemble, like Swing and Swing More from Project Sam. They have some decent saxophones. They aren't too bad. And I think Berlin have some now as well. And there is a big band. They have a big band library, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's the what is it? Yeah, it's all of like the I forget what they called it, but they have like a full band library that's out now.
It's not Glory Days, is it? No.
Glory Days. Yeah,
is it Glory Days? Yeah, that's one. Yeah, I think they have a few decent sound saxophones, but that was kind of an instrument that when I first came to sort of writing music, I was like, okay, I'd like to find a saxophone library, but I couldn't really find anywhere to an extent, like, cause that's kind of one of them, like the solo violin.
Yeah, but I feel like percussion and string shorts have always been like the things that are just timeless. Like they all work so incredibly well. And like even Danny Elfman on a lot of his cues, he'll keep the sampled percussion and also like string shorts and pizzicatos and stuff, just because like you're like when you're sampling, you're essentially just capturing a moment in time. It's essentially just like time travel with music. And for shorts, it's just so much easier because you aren't having to deal with the natural evolution that a player naturally goes through when they're playing, whether it's a bowing or anything like that. So you can get really, really great isolated sounds that work really just as well. And I know even people that record string shorts, for example, like separately, as like, you know, the way that Alan Meyerson does it, they'll actually just like double string shorts with samples on it, just because sometimes you might want 40 players playing your staccato line where you only have 20 players, and instead of overdubbing, you'll just add some shorts to make it more aggressive.
And one thing I'd kind of like to get back to about your now sort of joining the filmmaking is you're going to actually kind of come at this from an interesting angle. Like a lot of composers sometimes will kind of say, and even I've experienced once or twice, like kind of just talking to a director about maybe writing for the film. They don't, I wouldn't say necessarily talk down to composers, but to an extent, like they undervalue the music to an extent sometimes, where from your kind of, you're coming from the music aspect into the filmmaking aspect. So any composer, if you do eventually hire a composer, would have just an absolute sort of ease of working because you know the importance of that's there, and it can just easy to like collaborate as well because all the terminology, the correct terminology is there. Any sort of problems they might come across. So, like, do you think it's just gonna be like super beneficial for you, like going forward, really, when you actually do sort of take on other composers as well?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, and I'll say this from the perspective of someone who's like directed and edited my film and then gone on to score it, is I'll get to the ending of the edit and I'm ready to score the film, and I go in and I have the film and the whole film is temped, and I'm like, who the hell added this temp music? And I realize it's actually me. So that becomes like filmception. It's like, oh my gosh. But it's hard to explain. Well, no, it's not. I realize now why temp music is so vital. You just really can't edit a film without it, because you have to show it to people and you've got to use the temp to help with the pacing of the film. And I totally understand that temp love is a thing and it's sort of obnoxious. But at the same time, like it, from the perspective of an editor, it makes sense to edit with music. And for people like Paul Thomas Anderson and stuff who can edit their films without temp, or I think Polanski's another one that does all of his films without temp, respect to him. But in the modern world where you're having to show your financiers cuts of the film and you're having to screen it and get test screenings and all that stuff, it just helps a lot. And but temp love is a thing that I don't think will ever go away. But
and friends, I don't mind temp music though. Like who did I
yeah,
have this conversation with? I think it might have been actually in the most recent podcast with a composer, Mark Gordon, which I wouldn't say you're too familiar with him, but he's based over here in Northern Ireland, but he's very prolific in sort of children's animation. He's worked on a lot of like Disney and Nickelodeon sort of kids TV series, and
yeah,
he would have a lot of temp. He was saying he'd have a lot of temp to work on different things, but I don't mind temp once it's not over the top and people can kind of break away from it. I think JJ is actually saying the same as well. Like when I was chatting with him, and I was saying once sort of the director has an open mind to it to an extent, and he won't just drill you down to like a sergeant saying no, make this for me, and you're like, oh, okay, I can. There's not a lot of creativity there, but yeah, okay, I can make it. But I think sometimes, like you're saying with the whole DAW, yeah, it can be daunting sometimes to open a DAW and see something blank, but then to open a DAW and have the video up on the top left while you're trying to watch it, and then just seeing that scrolling and no music to it, you're like, oh Jesus, where am I going to go? So sometimes temp can be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can sort of understand, like, when Hans keeps seeing the Thin Red Line Journey to the Lion cue pop up in every single movie he does during the big denouement scene at the end, and he's like, oh my gosh, can't you just put a new piece here? Like, I understand that, but I totally agree with you. Like, it helps. First of all, filmmakers can't really speak the language of music, other than if you're talking about someone like Gore Verbinski, who, for example, is actually a really good guitarist and was able to talk with Hans on a pretty musical level. But in general, directors are looking for different ways to communicate with composers. And many times that's story. And I think that's the best way. But sometimes temp is also a good way because it lets the composer know this is how I'm feeling emotionally. This is how I sort of want the scene to feel emotionally. I just think the best possible case scenario is the director will say, this is how I want the emotion to feel, but you feel free to add in your own voice and make it its own for the film. Because I mean, if you're telling the composer just blatantly copy the piece without copying the piece, I mean, at that point, you're just doing, it just feels like labor. It just feels like, oh my gosh, how far am I going to go before this ends up getting a copyright notice or something? But if you have a great director who trusts in the composer, like a sort of Christopher Nolan or Spielberg, Williams connection, and you're able to have that trust, I think that is, you know, able to create a lot of great collaborations.
Yeah, and are you hoping to sort of get that yourself one day, to where you might just take a complete backseat in a project, and you might just find that one composer where you're like, you know what, I don't have to write any music for this project. I'm just gonna leave it be to an extent.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And I feel like, I don't know, I know so many composers. Like, I think the amazing thing about composers and composing is that, like, people do specific things so incredibly well. So like, I just know that I can think of 20 people off the top of my head that know how to write for orchestra better than I can, and I would hire them in an instant if I had the opportunity to. And so I think that, like, for sure, the great thing about music and about composers is that there's so much creativity out there, and there's so much individualism. And I think that no matter how much, you know, there's this conversation about, like, oh, the whole Hans Zimmer sound is taking over everything. I don't think it is. And I think that people are being original. And really what music is all about is, you know, music's been developing for thousands of years, and harmony's been around since the 1500s, and we've had so many different voices in it. And pretty much every idea that's been imagined really has been down. But what we're doing now is we're taking all of our influences, putting them together, mixing it up, and creating our own sort of mixtures of that. And so that's what our sounds end up being. And I think it's totally cool, that process.
Yeah, see, I don't really agree with the whole Hans Zimmer's music's taking over everything either, because if, like, his style of music won't work in every genre of film. If that was the case, it'll just be trying to everything. Really, like, fair enough. Yeah, in superhero music, it might be getting a bit much at times, but that's not even just fully down to him. That's just kind of the tropes and just everything that's sort of involved in superhero music to understand. Like, that's not his fault. But you're not just going to suddenly do a drama score or a horror score and suddenly throw Hans Zimmer's music on top of that. Like, so this isn't going to work. There's plenty of other composers out there that do those styles really well.
Yeah. And Hans would be the first guy to say, like, don't try to sound like me. Like, I don't know. There's this whole idea that, like, he has this big evil empire and he wants everything to sound like him. That's totally not the case. He's this, like, chill, laid back guy who's essentially, he's just like, he loves individualism. So that's why when he saw Harry Gregson Williams, or when he saw Henry Jackman, or all these other guys that he took on, or Benjamin Wallfisch, he saw something in them that was like different and that he sort of appreciated. And he has this really great knack for that. And so I think that that's really the key to the whole thing, is just like stay individual, write the music that you love writing. And there's nothing wrong with like studying other people's music or bringing in elements from other people's music. You know, that whole idea of great artists steal, you know, it's like you can take little elements from here and little elements from here. And if you like the string staccatos in Hans's music, take those. If you like the flutes in Desplat's music, you take those and create your own secret composer mixture.
Yeah,
you know?
just mix and match and see what sort of comes out with. But like that is like, you just need to. I struggled with that at the start for a while, and I still now even sometimes struggle. I'm like, I just want to be able to write everything, but then realize, well, maybe my strong suit isn't actually writing everything. I can't just one style of music I love, and for some reason I think it's actually more down to my production quality rather than the actual writing, is trailer music. I absolutely I love trailer music, but I get to around a minute and a half, a minute and 40, and then I'm like, I've hit the peak of this and I can't go any further through. I'm like, I still need another minute to go. Like, but it happens every single time. It's like, okay, well, maybe I just won't write trailer music. Like, sometimes you have to kind of be brutally honest with yourself as a composer as well, and just see where your strong points are. Because if you pursue those strong points, you probably will see actually like a bit of praise coming from there and actual work coming from there later on. Like,
yeah, that's why I have so much like respect and admiration for guys like Desplat, who just literally weave in and out of every single genre and literally can just pretty much do anything. Like he'll go from Godzilla to A King's Speech to The Imitation Game to, I mean, Harry Potter. It's just like, it's pretty amazing the fact that he has that much music in him and he's able to go so beautifully from one genre to the next. And I think that across the board you see that, whether it's in television or whether it's in
and it's not even with the media. It's like he even goes back to sort of like traditional French like theatrical stuff, and then he goes back to concert music as well. He starts writing concert work still. Like he literally does anything he can nearly to actually write music.
Really, and now there's this whole awesome onset of art house film, which has actually leaped from being independent film to mainstream film. And specifically, we've seen that with studios like A24, with films like Hereditary and Midsommar and Moonlight, Lady Bird, etc. Like they've sort of brought these smaller independent art house films into the big limelight. And what happens with these small art house films is they're made by independent filmmakers who have their own composer friends from university who bring them on board and end up, we get tons of new musical voices. So far we've got Colin Stetson, the Haxon Cloak. We've got Nicholas Britell has made this huge, gigantic, big leap from doing stuff like Moonlight into Succession and If Beale Street Talks. So it's just so cool seeing so many unique musical voices that have their own specific sound sort of pop up every now and then, you know.
And now I just realized we actually got sidetracked away from the film because I wanted to ask one other thing with it. Where did actually the idea of like focusing on the Holocaust, like it's amazing, like it's amazingly shot and the stories and how you've actually got to interview so many different Holocaust survivors is amazing. And that it's like for a composer, which obviously you compose them, but with Michael, that's like it's a really, really good emotional story to actually compose to. Like it's great. It's not like you'll be sitting there thinking, oh God, what am I going to throw into this? It's like there's loads to work with. But what exactly made you want to focus on that theme, like to go for your first film? Like,
right, the Holocaust has sort of been an important part of my life since I was really young. I remember when I was 7, I first saw Schindler's List, which is sort of the preeminent Holocaust film made in the 1990s, and sort of started this whole wave of people learning about and studying the Holocaust. And I remember learning that my great uncle was one of the liberators of one of the concentration camps, and I just formed this connection to the subject. I started reading books and seeing movies. I watched the 9.5-hour documentary Shoah at one point, and I just sort of felt the need, like, if I'm going to make a Holocaust film, I need to make it now, because in 20 or 30 years, I'm not going to get the chance to speak to survivors in person. So I realized, like, you have to do it now. So I went out, I did the interviews. We made it on practically no budget. We had a few investors, but in general, like it was super, we were just trying to make ends meet the whole time. Like I would do an interview, wind up somewhere and realize I was out of money and have to raise a little bit more money to get from there to another location. So it was definitely a learning experience for me, as much as it was just making a film. It's, you learn so much just from being out on the field, running into mistakes. I remember being in Poland and being lost in train stations, not knowing how European train systems work, and I was like, what do I do? And like, it's just like, but that's part of the thing that I love so much about filmmaking, is it forces you to get out there and get out of your studio for a little bit and do some exploration of this very interesting world that we all reside in.
And then I suppose for the end product, you would have written a lot of music. Would it be safe to say that the end product of that has been more satisfying than any sort of end product you've seen so far?
Yeah. I remember the premiere of the movie. It was in October of last year. We were at the Heartland International Film Festival here in Indianapolis, and there were people from all over the world coming in for this thing. And I just remember being in the theater as the film started, and I was just sort of peeking back and looking at all of the people's sort of reactions, because I wanted to know how they liked the film and if they reacted to it. And I just remember by the ending of the film, it was just such an interesting experience, because when you make a film, it's so personal, and you're spending a lot of time in a very solitary feelings. You're putting the film together, but finally when it's shown to an audience, it becomes their film. They go through what you just went through. It's like you're relaying that experience to them, and that transition of energy is just so interesting. And I think that that's what makes films so powerful. Is like, films are films, of course, but films have the power to sort of make change and make people think in different ways. And even just Schindler's List, for example, that started the USC Shoah Foundation, which now has 60,000 survivor testimonies that we would not have if it wasn't for that film. And that's just the beginning of it. There are so many films I can think of. And with this film, it's just been truly an honor to be able to screen this movie for young kids in schools, to know that it's being seen on Amazon. And I'm very grateful for people taking that chance and watching this film. And I'm just very grateful for that.
And then one other thing I kind of wanted to get a question across to was about sort of composers and making sort of connections with, now since you're actually got to come from both sides, you've got to come from as a director getting composed, and from being a composer trying to get a director. But I'm actually going to look at this sort of from the Facebook standpoint, because you are obviously, well, you started the group Global Composer Network. Was that sort of an idea for you to start just to connect with people from the Hans Zimmer Masterclass, or was it actually like sort of long run, you're like, okay, I want to actually build this as a community and actually sort of get connections to an extent with it, like sort of going forward?
When the first trailer for the Hans Zimmer Masterclass came out, I think it was in December of 2016, I immediately realized I needed to start something for people to be able to communicate and stay connected on this subject, because I knew that the class was going to be pretty big for the composer community. It almost just came out of nowhere too, like Masterclass had been building up at that point and they'd had tons of great classes, but Hans Zimmer comes out of the blue and it's like, holy, what? Is this a dream or something? So me and a couple friends of mine started this Hans Zimmer Masterclass Academy, and we would just sort of have, weekly posts or on the Facebook page, and people would talk about each lesson, and we would sort of converse with each other. And immediately I was just like, this is so cool, because people from all around the world are just sort of pitching in and giving their thoughts. And so when that sort of dimmed down, because everybody had seen the class and everything, I realized we should go into something a little bit bigger, a sort of next step. And then we started the Global Composers Network, which I think now we have like 7,500 plus people on there. And that's just proven to be a really cool platform. If people have questions or if they want to converse about anything, that page is there. We also have Post to Track Friday, where essentially every single Friday people can share a piece of music and get feedback on it. So it's just been a great way to sort of bring the community together. And it's definitely inspired me a lot, just seeing so many different people with their own voices coming together and listening to each other's music. It's just super, super cool.
Yeah, because I'm looking at kind of from the online point of view, because you would have, as I said, you would have been quite young starting out composing. So have you done most of your sort of connecting actually online with directors and so on, like through either the Facebook page and then them getting to know that you're actually the one running the page, or then through your YouTube channel, you actually find most of your connections through online rather than attending film festivals and meeting people in person at first, sort of going forward.
Right. So I think first of all, film festivals are like a really, really cool way to meet people. And I haven't really had the chance to go to like the big ones like Cannes Film Festival or Sundance or Telluride. Any of those are going to be great hotspots for collaborations. Like, you know, for example, Cannes in France is known for like people going to bars after the screenings and meeting each other, and some person with a script is going to come and meet somebody else. So it's very known for that. So if you ever get the chance to go to a film festival, that's a great way to meet directors and get scripts read and stuff like that. But for me personally, the YouTube channel has been like a super strong part of it. People will see the videos and send me an email, or the just sort of like my music. People will hear it somewhere and they'll send a message about that. So I think there's no one way to do it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like if you do this, you'll get in contact with the director. But just, I think being yourself and just putting yourself out there and having your music out there and loving what you do, that's going to do leaps and miles. And we're in this new age now where we've seen a lot of composers that weren't really film composers turn into composers.
Yeah.
For example, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is a great example of that. But again, Colin Stetson on Hereditary, when that film was incredibly successful, this guy was just writing solo saxophone music, and Ari Aster, the director of that film, heard it, wrote the script to it, got in touch with him, and automatically he's now a film composer and he's scoring stuff all the time now. So this is how things happen. It's like, it just, you know, you got to keep going out there, sharing yourself, sharing your energy, and I think people will see that.
Yeah, I think Junkie XL is another example of that as well. Like, he started off in DJing and now he's suddenly doing loads of does blockbuster films, like, and consistently doing them as well. It's not like he's just dropping in and out. He's now basically a full-time film composer at this point. Like,
100%. I just re-listened to the Mad Max soundtrack a few days ago, and it's just still so gold. It's so
good.
I
find his YouTube channel sometimes interesting for that, because he randomly just posts up a clip from like an old score and like, oh, actually, I'll actually go listen to that again, and like, just end up listening to the whole thing. Like,
no, it's amazing. His music is like really big. It's just like it's powerful.
That's, in fairness, that's one thing that has probably helped him being involved in electronic music for so long. His production's like ridiculous. It is, especially when it comes to actually percussion as well. His mixing is like just outrageous at times.
Oh, for sure. Like Alita is one that I really liked a lot. It just has a lot of cool sort of tech synthesizer elements, but he's able to blend in orchestra really well. But Mad Max, I think, is like his grand opus. You know, if there's such thing, it's just such a great score that brings the percussion and the guitars alone are just like, who is this guy? Like,
there's actually a track in what was the animation film that he recently did? There's a track in, I think it's called like the Super Bowl or the Mash Bowl or something like that. I can't remember the animation film that he did. What was the name of it? He was posting about it all over his YouTube channel.
Right.
I can't remember though, but like it's just one track. Like, as soon as you play it, it's like, it's mad synthy, and you're just like it's super creative, but like, it's a track that you just straight away you sit down, listen to it, like, it makes you want to go write some music and actually try just something different, like not open up like a standard template, just go in blank and actually just mess around with sounds and sort of just write a track from scratch, like.
Oh yeah, and he's got like great production value on his videos too. Like, all the different camera angles and all that stuff. It's just like super flashy. I love it.
There's a few people like that as well. I can't remember if I mentioned on the podcast yet, but Guy Mitchellmore from Think Space Education. He is like, I love his. He is absolutely hilarious. He is. I love his videos.
I adore that guy, and I've been watching his videos for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Like, literally, whenever I got a writer's block or whenever I was just like depressed, I go on that channel and here's like, hello, it's Guy. Welcome back to another video. And he's like running in his garden and he's going to the store to get a haircut. It's like, this guy is like the coolest.
Yeah.
Like,
he literally wrote a piece of music in a car wash on a portable rig. He did. Well, I can't remember, I think he was in the car wash for around 5 minutes while his car was actually being washed, and during the machine going off, he literally just wrote a piece of music in the car.
Oh my gosh.
Or like he recorded his sound. Like, he does mad tracks. Like, he literally recorded his entire car. Does like the clickers, the window wipers, I think rain hitting the windscreen when it was raining, which he actually made his assistant record out in the rain so he could sit in the car, and then made a complete track out of it. Like, he's very inspiring, in fairness.
I just love the procrastinating one where he's going back into town to get tea, and then he forgot the thing and he goes back, and then he comes back and it's like midnight.
It's very true. That's very true to my life sometimes, that video, in fairness.
I totally agree.
Anything just to get away from writing sometimes. yeah, no, he's very good. But that's what I find YouTube good for at times, because it's not a straightforward course you pay for. You'll find someone like him that does those real sporadic things, and you're just like, it'll take your actually mind off things where you feel like you're learning, but you're not intense learning. You're just sitting there sort of enjoying the experience. And when you're done, you're kind of like, okay, actually, I'm gonna go take what I learned and actually go write a bit of music. Like,
right. And it's totally just, again, that inspiration boost that you need every now and then to just get yourself going. And especially when you have a personality and a character like Guy, who's just he's just freaking hilarious. Like, it's just great. It helps so much. And it also helps with just learning. Like, if you ever had a great teacher in school, they were fun people who knew how to give information while also being sort of funny and comedic. And the best historians or the best people, or like in science, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, these are great communicators who are also just funny as heck. And so
another thing that I kind of wanted to ask you, because it's actually gone back to your YouTube videos and sort of behind the scores, you always have now I think you make sort of separate templates, do you, for each sort of behind the score? Am I right in saying that if you need something different, you'd add into sort of that template?
It's sort of weird for me, because I used to use templates, and now for the most part I do everything from the ground up, honestly.
Okay, that's like me then. That's what I was going to kind of ask you. It's like, because loads of people are saying, oh no, I need a template, I need everything sort of there and then. But what I found when I try to make a template, I feel like it actually sort of just held me in place a bit too much, and actually sort of stopped me from writing, or just keep using the same sounds over again, actually not making something new. So I start from scratch as well. But that's what I kind of wanted to ask you. Are you from scratch, or are you still like working from templates?
So whenever I'm doing like a behind the score, or I'm writing music for one of just my solo albums or whatever, I always start from the ground up now, because I found when I use templates, I'm always going back to the same string patch, and I'm always going back to the same piano, and the music just starts to like essentially sound the same. And when you build it from the bottom up, it just really helps in forcing you to think of new sounds and think of new approaches to it. But I remember for every single project, including We Shall Not Die Now, I'll always have a project-based template, just because when you're going from cue to cue and you're just dealing with a lot of music, like I think we wrote over two hours of music for We Shall Not Die Now, because there was the theatrical cut. And then I figured, while I have all of my hard drives and everything, I just want to make my own personal director's cut. So it's like a 2 hour and 30-minute film. So we ended up having something like 2 hours and 20 minutes of music that we wrote, all in all. So it was quite the journey on that one. And just having a template to bring everything together and help you with the process just is great.
Yeah, I suppose in a big sort of project that, it'd be probably more useful, because it's just easier to go back to, instead of suddenly you're opening up a different scene, you're going, okay, I'm starting from the ground again. And I suppose for a story, like a lot of composers probably, that's actually a lot of composers kind of unreal, when you're actually writing for a project, you're trying to tell the story just as much as the director is. So I suppose keeping the same template would just help with your own workflow, because if you sort of create a soundscape to the actual film, well, keeping that template would probably be the actual smarter thing to do, because you're not going to then suddenly go from jazz to an epic orchestral piece in the next scene. You're got to keep with the same sort of sound palette, like.
Right. And it's easy for one to say like, oh, I don't want to use templates, or I like being creative and doing it from the ground up. But until you like get over there to RCP and you're dealing with like writing, 50 hours of music for X-Men The Dark Phoenix, and you're up until 3 o'clock in the morning, that they need templates. Like, they need organization, because there's so much music being written, and it's just, it helps with staying organized and being able to work efficiently and quickly.
And one last thing I kind of wanted to ask before I let you go, because I noticed you actually did release your album, and is that your second album now?
Third,
okay.
So the first one was Fragments in 2018, and then Discovery in 2019, and then Winds of Spring in 2020.
Yeah, so the thing I've got to ask you, like, as you said, like Hans Zimmer's a big influence on you, but when I listen to your albums, one sound you kind of do right is actually like ethereal, sort of real, like those airy, spacey sort of type of sounds, like with the sort of like real airy sort of strings and woodwinds, which is like not a Hans Zimmer sound, like a typical sort of Hans Zimmer sound at all. Like, so you obviously have more than just him really, really influenced it. Like that'd be sort of closer to the Splat, as you said, or something like that. But that's the kind of sound that I get a lot from your albums. You like kind of enjoy just writing that sound and generate the real sort of airy, ethereal sort of just like like this, I feel like the music sort of breathing to an extent, like.
Yeah. I just really like those albums are just my way of just sort of like writing music that I just have a lot of fun writing.
Yeah,
So
creativeness.
I'll take flute patches and like I'll pitch them down and then time stretch them and then create pads and then play some piano on top of it and then have some strings beneath it. And that's just really like me going to the playground on those tracks. It's just tons of fun. And each of the albums have a different significance to me. Like the first one was really just all about being young and youthful, and Fragments it has a lot of sort of grooves and beats all throughout it, a lot of energy. Discovery is exactly what it sounds like. It's sort of my personal discovery process. It was right after Bleeding Fingers. So it's a little bit darker, it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit more ambient, because it was just my process of coming back from Los Angeles, figuring stuff out, trying to get back in the flow of things. And then Winds of Spring was really about hope. It's about hope in the midst of hard times. And I think that especially now with all of the stuff happening, that was just my way of saying like, it's hard, but we're going to get to a point where things are starting to come together, and spring is literally coming right up and weather's getting warm. And it was just my way of hopefully bringing some positive energy into the situation.
And what have you found your turnaround sort of time on them? Have some been faster than others, or have they kind of fell in around the same time frame before writing them?
Yeah, the first one was, I think it was 4 months, Fragments. Second one was 3 weeks, Discovery. And the reason is because like I get these weird like energy boosts. Like when I want to write an album, I want to write the album. And so I almost write the album like I would score a film, like a cue a day, and I'll go through and then I'll come back and I'll do a whole another round and go through the tracks again. I think Winds of Spring was a good month. So I had a lot of those tracks that were being written. Well, I think one of the tracks had been written like 4 or 5 months before I started actually putting the album together. But in terms of putting the whole thing together, I think that took a month and a half. It depends on what it is, though.
And then are you taking care of all the mixing and mastering yourself on all them as well? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. As good as I can do it.
Oh no, they sound great. They sound very realistic. That's why I think that's why they actually sound so realistic. Because as I said, there's not. Now I'll have to go listen back to the olds, but nothing that sort of sticks out to me as like a real over the top hybrid style track. They're really like like a lot of them are they're really slow, and sort of each one it feels like the music is breathing, so they sound actually very realistic. So yeah, the mixing I think is bang on.
I'm just hoping it's the kind of music you can just sort of throw on and just relax to, or sort of play in the car and just sort of groove along, and that's sort of what it's designed to be. It's just sort of relaxed music that's really all about reminiscing and hanging out. So
not to suddenly take over the world, jump into your car and fly down the freeway.
Yes, it's like I heard somebody the other day. He was like, my favorite score I love to listen to in the car is Dunkirk, and I was like, Dunkirk, wow! And so you like, it's like literally, you got to be careful not to speed if you're listening to Dunkirk in the car. I mean,
I think so.
Sounds pretty daring.
Some people have their own taste, I suppose. Might make him feel a certain way when he's in his car. I'm not sure.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I love Dunkirk.
And I keep getting questions before I let you go. I will let you go. Don't worry, because I know you're busy. But one other thing, have you ever thought about sort of going down when you started off? Because I find now that music is kind of being expanded, and you can see all the different sort of ways to go about actually making it a living to an extent as a composer. So like, it's not just really, there is obviously media composers out there that will take like most things. You take TV, video game, film, all into one. But I think a lot of people are starting to sort of separate themselves into, okay, I am a film composer, or I am a video game composer, because they are completely different beasts. Especially if writing a video game score and learn how to implement it into a game and stuff is completely different to a film. But have you ever sort of thought about just going down like a video game or even a production library, actually, like, because there is a few big like composers out there that write under sort of company names to an extent for production libraries, just for back end royalties? Like, have you ever thought of sort of doing that?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that kind of stuff. In terms of video games, I've really never played video games. So
that's fair enough. Then,
I don't know if I'd be able to connect with that. TV shows, I think, is where it is at now. I think the best media is by far TV shows. Like if you look at what HBO is doing, or Even Apple TV is doing some great stuff right now with like Defending Jacob, or HBO. You of course have True Detective, which I mean is among the best things I've ever seen on a screen. Period. Like so, TV is really just proven to be a great platform to develop characters and have a storyline run through. And I think especially miniseries, for example, Chernobyl is just is so heavy hitting and powerful. Or miniseries like Band of Brothers or The Pacific or stuff. So hopefully one day I'd love to be a part of something like that, like a mini series that's 8 episodes long that takes you in and into a certain event. I love historical, so I'm constantly reading history books, and so I'd love to work on a history film or a history series someday that goes into I don't know, some like the Netflix film The King about the 15th century England. Like that for me is like a dream project. Like I'd love to do something like that. So yeah, we'll see. It should be an interesting road.
I find there's a lot of sort of creativity in TV scoring as well, though, because as you said, there's a story to be built there. So, and I suppose actually each season there's kind of like you could take a different approach. You could go season by season. And there's a lot of time to sort of expand on your sort of musical development within sort of TV series. Like the one score that always stands out to me, I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, is the TV series Hannibal. And who was the composer? I think Brian Reitzel was his name. He's TV composer for that score, and the score is absolutely amazing. Now it's kind of a creepy TV series at times, but the score is 100% the reason why that's so enhanced. Like it's unbelievable, and he even takes harpsichord and absolutely just tears it apart. Or he takes even original Bach pieces and just turns them so synthy, and it's amazing. But I think it's because you have that time. You don't just have like an hour and a half or 2 hours in one film. You have episodes upon episodes to actually sort of expand on this musical sort of soundscape you actually want to build. Like,
yeah, for sure. Like what Hildur did with Chernobyl is just like really cool. She went and recorded power plants and like took those sounds and edited the sounds, and then all of those sounds of the power plants are literally like pads beneath the whole entire show. So when you feel like you're in the depths of this huge power plant, you're literally like the sounds are coming from that. It's just so cool, and it's really creative. And I think composers are getting a lot of flexibility now because of TV shows to be able to develop their themes, develop their sounds. And it obviously takes longer to do like these series, but at the same time, I just think it would be so fun to work on. I'd love to work on one someday.
All right, and the last thing before I let you go, I just want to let you sort of say any sort of project you have coming up. I'll have all your stuff linked in the end of this anyway, so don't worry about that. But if it's a film, if it's a track, if another secret album that you're doing, I don't know, anything you can mention anything you have coming up.
Yeah, the thing I'm doing right now is I'm like full-fledged into filming for my next documentary feature. The film is called The Hills I Call Home, and it's all about this region of the United States called Appalachia, which is along the eastern part of the U.S. And there's essentially a lot of these communities that are deep in the middle of the woods of eastern United States. And they go all the way back to the Scots-Irish settlers back in the 1600s. And it's an incredible group of people that are very resilient. They've had a lot of struggle through the past couple hundred years in regards to economy and other things like that. But they've always stayed strong. They have an incredible family value, incredible history. And we're going into these communities. And it's one of the first times that cameras are really going to be capturing their stories and letting them get the chance to tell their stories themselves. Because I think over the past 20, 30 years, you've heard words like hillbilly and redneck be thrown around. But these are people just like you and I that are trying to make their living. And so that's what the film is all about. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with everybody.
Oh, great. Sounds good. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. Anyone who's listening, as I said, all of Ashton's links will be in the description or in the comments of this video to his website, his YouTube channel. Go and have a look. There's plenty of content there in his YouTube channel to dive into. It'll take you not even hours, it'll take you days and weeks to get through it all. So go over, have a look, and keep an eye out for his next film. And We Shall Not Die is the name of the one that's already out, isn't it?
We Shall Not Die Now, yes.
Yeah, We Shall Not Die Now. So, and it's on Amazon.
Amazon Prime, yep.
Yeah.
And then if you can't get Amazon Prime, it is on YouTube as well. If you just look up We Shall Not Die Now, it's on Timeline World History. So it's a YouTube channel. You can watch it for free.
There you go. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.